It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to come back to Madison, where, of course, Savage Love got started in the back room of 4-Star Fiction and Video, where a few things got started while I was there. I've been running Savage Love for 23 years, which is a very long time. I gave your parents, many of you, blowjob advice back in the day. Thank God your moms did more than swallow, or you would not be with us tonight. But working in a Q&A format that long really carves the Q&A groove very deeply in your non-existent soul. So I much prefer to get to the Q&A as quickly as possible. But I'm going to say just a few things about my experiences with free thinking and the trouble that it got me into. I grew up Catholic on the north side of Chicago. I assume, this being Wisconsin, that I'm not the only Catholic, recovered or otherwise, in the room. Unlike my siblings, though, I had two brothers and a sister. I believed it. I really fell for it. I bought it. I fell hard. My dad was a Catholic deacon. My mom was a Catholic lay minister. I had aunts who were nuns. My grandfather was a high poobah in the Knights of Columbus. We went to church every Sunday, and I went to a seminary for high school, a preparatory seminary. The Catholics, they always like to get you nice and young in every sense of that expression. And they were reeling me in, and I was 13 when I arrived at the seminary, and then I hit puberty. And hitting puberty, realizing you're gay your first year in an all-boys Catholic seminary, it's a little bit like realizing you're an alcoholic at your first day at the Budweiser bottling plant. It was a little awkward. And really, my sexuality did bring me into conflict with what I was being told by my church, which also told me that it was always right about everything. Don't bring up Galileo, please. They hated that. But I got in trouble even before my sexuality brought me into conflict with my church, with my faith, or what I've been taught to believe. Even when I was a little, monstery brat in grade school, I was so obnoxious. I did the thing that the Catholic Church burnt people at the stake for 500 years ago. I read the Bible. The Catholic Church burnt people at the stake for translating the Bible into the vernacular back in the day. And I read it, and I would get into arguments with priests who taught our religion classes at St. Jerome's about whether women should be priests, because it seemed to me quite obvious from any cursory reading of the Gospels, I would say, precociously, in grade 6, that although there were no female disciples that made it through the final edit, the first two people to whom Jesus manifested himself after the resurrection were Mary and Mary Magdalene and his mother Mary. They were the first people to preach the good news of the risen Lord. That's how I talk to them. I talk about butt fucking and fist fucking. It's much more fun. And the first people to disbelieve this news were the disciples, were men. So, because so much of the Bible is this inscrutable parable-a-thon, and we're supposed to infer and interpret and read into this massive trick question that is life itself, as presented to us by our Catholic God, it seems to me that the answer to the trick question, should women be priests, was evidently answered by Jesus himself, who the first priests were indeed women. And I would say this shit to priests and get yelled at. Also to my dad, the Catholic deacon, once I was home alone as a very small child, I think I was 6 or 7, looking at one of those illustrated encyclopedias for children. And I found a procession up a Mayan temple, up a Mayan pyramid. And I was looking at this. I was like 7 years old. I'm looking at this. I had my first communion. Looking at this, going, there are these priests in these feathered robes, and there are people carrying sacred objects in this long procession down this aisle. And I looked at it and went, that looks like Mass. And I took it to my dad and went, that looks like Mass. And he said, yes, but they were wrong. And I said, how do you know that? Because I have faith. And I was like, well, but they did too. And that was sort of the beginning of the end, even at age 7. But it really wasn't until what I wanted to do with my dick, or what I wanted to do with my dick, brought me into conflict with the church that I really had to think about it. And some people I know who are queer and Catholic will be brought into conflict with the church because every sperm is sacred and we're putting sperms in unsacred spots. And they'll do this thing that I've never understood. They'll go find a church that isn't wrong about them Instead of thinking what I did at age 13, well, if they're wrong about me, if they're wrong about sexuality, because I couldn't see what could possibly be wrong with gay sex. No one was getting hurt. And love is love. Like, even then, I was like, love is love, and I want to kiss boys, and what the fuck's wrong with that? Instead of thinking, I just need to go out and search and find a church, find a faith that isn't wrong about my sexuality, I started thinking, well, if they're wrong about sexuality, what else are they wrong about? And that is a thread that when you're gay and you're sort of brought into conflict with the faith and tradition in which you were raised, when you start pulling that thread, the entire garment unravels, and unravels quickly. And I was so grateful. I mean, then I was so terrorized or tormented and upset. But I'm so grateful now that it was sex that brought me, that prompted me to think freely. Because sex is the obvious obsession of the three great desert monotheisms, right? And if you start thinking, well, why this obsession with sex? What is it about? And ultimately, it's about control. Because if you can convince someone that their desires are sinful, if you can convince someone that their desires make God puke, if you can convince someone that their longings, most intimate thoughts, the way they express love, or the way they seek release is going to get them damned for all eternity and cast into a lake of fire where they will be tormented for all eternity, you've really got them. And if you're the only person they can go to, the only institution that they can go to because you have taught them this for intercession, if you're the only arbiter that can plead their case, if you're the only gumball machine where they can get the magic gumball that forgives their sins and wipes them clean, you can control those people. And that's why it's always sex. Islam sex, Christianity sex, Judaism sex. Why it's regulated. To control. And not just control the gays, but control women particularly, but also men, to terrorize all of us about our sexualities and our desires. Because if you can terrorize people about that, you've got them. They also do dietary stuff, but that's easy. Don't eat pork. All right. Whatever, there's turkey bacon now. We're good. But if you can get them sexually, you've got them and you've got them for life, particularly if they buy it and they believe it. And they present to us all of the big sort of crazy sex-negative faiths for millennia. They've presented to us this warped misconception of human sexuality, which in a way is, I guess, charming. Not at all, I'm being sarcastic. This warped idea of what human sexuality is for. You know, Sam Harris, in his book, Letter to a Christian Nation, as I've gotten into great amounts of trouble mentioning in front of audiences full of high school students, points out that the Bible got slavery wrong. He calls it the easiest moral question that humanity ever faced, and the Bible got it wrong. The Bible is a pro-slavery document. The Bible was on the side of the slave owners, and they were very clear about that during the Civil War. And so if the Bible got slavery wrong, what else did the Bible got wrong? Well, if the Bible got the most obvious moral question humanity's ever faced wrong, what are the chances the Bible got something as complicated and mysterious to people hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, as human sexuality wrong? About 100,000% is my rough estimate. And they continue to get it wrong. When you look in our culture, you know, Australia got the convicts and Canada got the French and we got the Puritans. If you just look in our culture at the things social conservatives, religious conservatives, and the Republican Party obsess about, it is sex. All of them are sex, the social issues that they prefer to talk about because they cannot win an economic issues argument, so they want to talk about what? Butt fucking. They want to talk about birth control pills. And they want to talk about abortion, and they want to talk about gay marriage. The one thing that all of these things have in common is sex for pleasure. Is that someone is having sex not intending to make a baby. As Rick Santorum said, you're doing that which is wrong, that we know to be wrong, because sex has one purpose, which is procreation, according to Rick Santorum. That was God's intent, which is why human females go into heat like cats, and that's the only time you can fuck them. There's another trick question laid at our feet by our loving, fucking, comic, joker God. You're only supposed to do it this one way, but I'm going to desire you to do it every which way and want to do it every which way. And then if you haven't gotten the priest's blessing after, then you go to hell. But just see, so when you talk, anyway, this is what I say. I need a question, next question. When you talk about human sexuality, it is still all of these social issues that we debate so ferociously in this country, in our culture. It's still about this inability of so many people, because of the faiths in which they were raised, to reconcile themselves to what human sexuality is about and for. And it is about and for pleasure. It has been estimated that humans have 1,000 sexual contacts for every single live birth. What's sex for? Those babies? Yeah, 1 out of every 1,000 times. Sex is obviously fulfilling some other role in the lives of all of us as individuals, but also in our cultures and our societies. Sex is doing other things, providing pleasure, release, creating intimacy, creating partner bonds or triad bonds or quaddy bonds. Sex does all of this and more, and that is a feature, not a bug. And faith traditions that people were making up back when we didn't know why the sun came up every day, surprise, it's back. And they had to explain that away. They wanted to explain and regulate human sexuality, and I do believe that humans need some regulation of their sexual impulses and desires and behaviors, but it needs to come from inside, from a moral framework that is not tied to faithy hoo-ha, because sex is dangerous and powerful, and we have to be thoughtful as we approach it. And I smoke a lot of pot, so I completely forgot where I was going. Anybody want to remind me? Jamie Kilstein probably get me off the sauce. Can we just do questions now, or I'm just going to lose myself? Anyway, fucking fuck. Enjoy fucking. It's fucking awesome. This is where I was going. It is my fond hope, as we continue to have this conversation about sex and sexuality, that's really brand new. We've only just discovered the rest of the clitoris in the last 15 years. We weren't aware of the rest of it. We've only really just, in the last half century, begun to study human sexuality in a serious and scientifically sound way. But as we come to understand human sexuality better, I'm hoping that we can decouple it from religious superstition, fear it less, enjoy it more, and allow it to be as meaningful and important and powerful and transcendent, which is the secular word for spiritual, as it can be, and as it should be. And we might as well enjoy it because we can't escape it, unless we're asexual, in which case, good for you, you win. All right, let's do some questions. This is why I work in a Q&A format. I can't just give a speech and talk. I need like the back and forth. I need the play.
So you alluded to this a little bit. In 2012, you took a little bit of heat for telling a group of high school students that you can learn to ignore the bullshit in the Bible about gay people. You want to tell us about that?
I spoke at the National Conference of High School Journalists, 3,000 high school students, juniors and seniors, in a convention center in Seattle. And when I got there, I was like, do you want me to pull any punches? Do you want me to like dial it back? And they're like, no, don't patronize them. Speak to them as if they are adults, because indeed they are. And I said that there was, when I was talking about bullying, I was talking about the It Gets Better Project, and you have these people who run around saying they can't help but bully queer teenagers because, it says right here in the Bible. But we ignore all sorts of other fucking things that are right there in the Bible. We pretend they're not even there. We pretend, you tell people that the Bible is pro-slavery, and they don't believe you. Christians, who allegedly read the Bible all the time, insist that is not so, and you have to read shit to them to win the argument. And I said, we've learned to ignore the bullshit in the Bible about menstruation and seafood and farming and clothing and slavery. And we can learn to ignore the bullshit in the Bible about us too. Queer people are not asking Christians to do anything that they already haven't done. which is let go of that, to acknowledge that the Bible got human sexuality wrong, gay people wrong, just like it got slavery wrong. But I said bullshit in the Bible, which you're not allowed to do. There's this wonderful Mark Twain quote where he said the Bible has some gory ancient history, some beautiful parables, some this, some that, and upwards of 1,000 lies, which is 19th century for bullshit. Right? No, this is not a new idea that there's bullshit in the Bible. But I said it in front of 3,000 high school students, and 22 of them walked out, which on Fox News became a mass walkout. On Fox News became I was speaking at a Christian high school, that I had somehow seized control of this conference, and I'm the devil. You have to invite me to come. I don't just show up. And it was very instructive. I reach out to people sometimes when they're in that Fox News crosshairs, where they're just being demagogued about, and it really does blow up your email, it blows up your Twitter feed. You have a million fucking drooling psychos coming at you all at once, and it can really make you feel panicked. And I always tell people, it burns hot, it burns fast. If any of you ever are in that position that I was in, where I was just being screamed at on Fox News and the Sunday talk shows and these columnists, Breitbart, just turn off your computer, get stoned, go to the movies, wait a couple of days, and they will be on to the next outrage-a-thon. And then you can open your email and you can count all the emails from people with AOL addresses. And think, haha.
How do we deal with biblical fundamentalists who think that being gay is literally an abomination?
How do we deal with them? Well, we can't. One of the things that I've typically tried to avoid doing, although, bullshit in the Bible, sometimes we have to argue with them about their theology, taking their theology as the frame, right? You have to sometimes argue with religious people, accepting their framework, accepting their premises, right? But I think it's really sometimes very good for secular folks, for leftists, for queers, to say to people, I am going to hell. I will concede that. Religious fundamentalist, right-wing fundamentalist, Bible-beating Christian, I am going to hell with the Jews and the yoga instructors and the Catholics if you're a Lutheran, and the Lutherans if you're a Catholic. The world is full of people who are going to hell, according to you. But why do we come in for this very special attention and persecution here on earth? All we queers want is the same deal the Jews have now. Not historically, but now. There are no pogroms now. Can we not have that? And then you can content yourself with the idea that I will be roasting on a spit in hell for all eternity, being tortured only by female devils, lest I get off on it if it's a dicked devil. And it can sometimes be very freeing for someone just to say, to remind them that you're entitled to your private religious beliefs. All we're saying is that your private religious beliefs and bigotries can no longer have force of law. That doesn't strip you of your private little sandbox religious beliefs. You can believe whatever fucking bullshit you want to believe. But I shouldn't have my rights curtailed in this life because you think that your imaginary friend hates me. I can invent an imaginary friend who hates you. And then where are we? So we have to agree to disagree about what our imaginary friends think is icky. And so sometimes that's the best tack. There are persuadables that you can argue about religion, you can argue about theology. So many people have changed their minds in the last 30, 40 years on this issue. It's not because all the people who were homophobic 30, 40 years ago died and have been replaced, although that has happened too in many cases. But no, many people have come around. So I think the trick in your own life is to identify the people who are reasonable and reason with them, and then just let it go. The unreasonable psychos say, yes, going to hell. Isn't that enough? Why do you have to punish me here on earth? It's almost as if you don't believe God is going to punish me in the afterlife. Let God take care of it.
So there's a correlation between the experiences of people who come out as non-religious to their families and their friends, and the people who come out in the LGBT movement. What can we do to encourage those people to come out and also support them while they're doing it?
It's all about community, and it's all about identifying. Armistead Maupin, if you want to borrow something from Gayland, in one of his early Tales of the City books, wrote this beautiful phrase, there's your biological family, and there's your logical family. And sometimes there's overlap. Sometimes there's a nice Venn diagram, and there's a whole bunch of people in your biological family who are also a part of your logical family. So you have to identify the people in your logical family. You have to create your own community, create your own families. And if there's one thing that I'm constantly telling young LGBT people who are coming out to do, that's very effective. People put this into practice. It works. And if you're in this position with your family because you're coming out as a non-believer and they're freaking the fuck out, this is what you do. Don't fear their rejection. Make them fear yours. Shift it. Your leverage over your parents as an adult child is your presence in their lives. If they cannot respect you, do not be present in their lives. Demand respect and unconditional love as a condition of your presence, not a condition of your love. You love them still, but you will not subject yourself to abuse. Period, the end. And queer kids do this. I talk to queer kids who are doing this now. I say, give your family a year to freak out, to ask ugly, stupid questions, to have their tantrum, and at the end of that year be, I'm not coming home for Christmas if Christmas is going to be an argument about my sexuality. That's over. I'm not coming home for Christmas if Christmas is going to be an argument about the baby Jesus. That's over. Really, it's all about shifting the terror dome, right? Look at them and say, who's going to change your fucking diapers in 20 years if you keep this up? Because it ain't going to be me.
So, to the best of my knowledge, you've added 2 words to the English language, pegging and Santorum. You want to give us a little background? Pegging and Santorum? A little background.
Pegging is a woman fucking a man in the ass with a strap-on dildo, which was a very popular kind of kink that people had just begun to explore in the early 90s, but every time it was written about in my column, they would have to use this like 40-syllable sentence. I'm a straight guy, but I'm interested in getting fucked in the ass by a woman with a strap-on dildo, and it was just so long. And we have word counts in columns. We have to condense things. So I asked my readers to invent a new term for this, and they all sent in suggested new definitions, and pegging one. A woman cannot peg another woman. Lesbians can't peg. Pegging is all about that sort of gender role inversion craziness of her fucking him, which is still straight sex, guys, if you're interested but terrified. If a woman is doing it to a man, it's straight sex no matter who's getting penetrated at any particular moment. And it's stuck and it's worked. Now, this is the accepted term. It hasn't made the Oxford English Dictionary yet, but it will. And Santorum, of course, and once again, I've been sort of curating this salon with my readers for so long. I didn't come up with the term pegging. I just identified a need and threw it out there to my readers and crowdsourced it before people were using the internet to crowdsource. And same thing with Santorum. Rick Santorum gave this terrible, read my book, American Savage, I unpack this at length. Rick Santorum in 2003 gave this interview famously where he compared married or gay couples, no, none married at the time, who wished to marry, to people who rape children and fuck dogs. Man on child, man on dog, 2 dudes who want to marry. And a reader wrote and said, let's never and the scandal blew up, and it was, people talked about it for a few days, for a couple weeks. George Bush came out and said that Rick Santorum's a good man who loves people in his heart, doesn't love people in his brain or his mouth ever, but... And a reader very presciently wrote me and said, we can't let this ever be forgotten. We should rename a gay sex act Santorum so this will always be remembered. And I threw that out there to my readers, and they all responded, and we put 10 different definitions proposed in the column that came from readers, and readers selected as the new definition for Santorum the frothy mix of lube and fecal matter that is sometimes the byproduct of anal sex.
And then that came up in Google searches more often than Santorum himself.
What?
That definition came up in Google searches more often than Rick Santorum himself.
It was the #1 Google return for Rick Santorum or Santorum for a decade. If you Googled Santorum, the first thing that popped up was our website, spreadingsantorum.com, which included on the Google's front page the whole entire definition. And when Santorum started to run for president in 2012, there were all these articles written about his Google problem. He has a Google problem. Somebody sees this guy in a debate, they go, I'm going to find his website so I can give him some money. And they Google him, and up pops the frothy mix of lube and fecal matter, something like that. And on the first page, then there was the wiki site about the neo-dualism campaign. There were the Urban Dictionary definition page for Santorum. Most of the results, including ours first, were this. And here's what happened when he ran for president in 2011-12. There were 1 million stories written about his Google problem, where they had to then talk about the AP interview where he compared gay couples to dog fuckers and child rapists. So it worked. That reader's idea that if we could successfully tag him, we could successfully appropriate his name and make it mean something horrible, that this interview could never be buried or forgotten, absolutely came true. Every story written about it, Wall Street Journal, conservative magazines, Mother Jones, the New York Times, they all had to unpack that interview over and over and over again in 2011. And they will have to when he runs for president in 2016, which he is going to do. All right.
Saddlebacking.
And saddlebacking. Saddlebacking is when Christians have anal sex to preserve their virginities, which is a thing. If you've had nothing but lousy sex education that says virginity is a vagina that's never had a penis in it, then every other orifice and pore is fair game. And diamondbacking, of course, is agreeing to have anal sex if he'll propose. All right, which are all riffs on barebacking, which is condomless anal sex.
Based on your experience in the atheist movement, how welcoming are atheist groups to LGBT people? What can we do better?
To make atheist groups more welcoming of LGBT people? I think they're plenty welcoming. I've never sensed from any atheist organization or even person I've ever talked to any hostility towards queer people. There are prejudices that sort of anti-queer prejudices that slosh around in the culture. Any organization of humans are going to have some sort of residual biases that have to be confronted or ID'd, or whether you're talking about any room with a lot of white people in it, any room with a lot of straight people in it. So we should be on our guard at all times, but I think we shouldn't freak out unnecessarily at well-intentioned people who put a foot wrong, because that's how you dissolve movements and drive people away. That's not how you build them.
Over the last 60 or so years, we've seen major cultural strides taken in racial equality, gender equality, LGBT equality, and civil rights in general. Do you think we're approaching a golden age of equality? And do you think we'll ever have true equality?
We will never have true equality, because we are just fucking monkeys in shoes, as Tim Minchin, freethinker, sings. There's always progress and there's always regress. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. Christopher Isherwood said social tolerance and justice can reach a high water mark like the tide and then recede out of sight. It was illegal to kill Jews in Germany in 1922, and not so much 20 years later. So we can't be blasé about the progress we've made. But as lefties, and I assume most of us here are lefties, the right wing has a myth that they constantly hammer away at, that any social progress is too risky, that we can't risk allowing LGBT people, or LGB, trans people still can't serve openly in the military, but we can't risk letting gay people serve openly in the military because, oh my God, the sky will fall, right? They made the same arguments about giving women the vote. They made the same argument about doing away with Jim Crow laws, letting African Americans vote. They're still kind of not so into the African Americans voting thing. And you see that on the conservative side all the time. The myth is, their myth is, we can't risk any progress, it's too dangerous and destabilizing. The left wing has its own myth, which is there's been no progress. That we are just as racist, just as sexist, just as homophobic, just as transphobic, a culture and a society as we have ever been. And that's bullshit. We have made tremendous progress, and as lefties, we should constantly be pointing to the progress that we have made because it destroys their argument that we can't risk progress. just on Don't Ask, Don't Tell is a great recent example. They predicted that if we did away with Don't Ask, Don't Tell and allowed queer people to serve openly in the military, that they said that 500,000 troops were prepared to quit the military, that 500,000 people were going to leave the military because they would not serve with openly gay, lesbian, or bi people. 2 people quit, both chaplains. Not exactly crucial to the war effort. And we should hang that around their necks. So whenever anybody says, when something terrible happens, when Matthew Shepard was murdered, a lot of people had this gut with Prop 8. Everybody had terrible reactions with Prop 8 passed, but a lot of people had terrible reactions when Matthew Shepard was murdered and said, look, there's been no progress. The state of Wyoming, and this is 20 years ago, the state of Wyoming prosecuted Matthew Shepard's murderers with the same ferocity that they would have prosecuted 2 dudes who murdered a nun. They brought them up on capital charges. They tried to get the death penalty. 20 years before that, they would have said he hit on me and been acquitted. So even in a horrifying story, even in a horrifying reality, even a horrifying moment like the murder of Matthew Shepard, you can detect a thread of progress, as perverse as that may sound. And we as lefties should always be identifying those threads of progress and celebrating them and putting focus and attention on them, not to cover up the places where we still need to make progress or things that are still fucked up, but to justify working on those things that are fucked up, because it will not destroy the culture or the society or bring down the republic.
Yeah, along the same lines, we've seen more and more people come out in as gay in areas of culture that have traditionally been opposed. Jason Collins and Michael Sam recently came out as openly gay men in professional sports, the first to do it in their respective sports. What do you think this says about the changing cultural sentiment to LGBT people?
Because hairdressers and cross-dressers and trans people and bull dykes and effeminate, crazy waiters couldn't hide 50 years ago and 40 years ago and decided to get up off the ground and start fighting. All those outcasts and queers made it safe for basketball players to come out and football players to come out. And I'm thrilled about it. I really am thrilled about it. I'm not disparaging what Jason Collins has done. Jason Collins has been amazing. But no hairdresser on the front lines at Stonewall screaming his lungs out, no Jason Collins 50 years later or 40 years later.
You recently wrote and released a new book titled American Savage. You want to give us a little background?
American Savage is sort of this, if you read the column, if you listen to the podcast, it's a lot of the ideas that I talk about all the time, about monogamy, about politics, about healthcare, about a whole bunch of different things, about end-of-life decisions, about sex, about kink, about GGG, sort of big chapters dedicated to all these things that have sort of risen up, including Rick Santorum, things that I've been toying with in my column and my podcast for a long time, throwing a lasso around these big issues, big ideas, and presenting them in one big, fat, stupid book. It's got a lot of, ass jokes in it, so you should read it. Politics goes better. Social commentary goes down easier with an ass joke or two.
What would you say the main point of your book is? Are you advocating for cultural change?
I think the biggest chapters in the book are on being GGG, decentering monogamy as a definitional sort of default setting for relationships and making it opt-in, and being thoughtful about relationships. And also, the gay shit. I pound the fuck out of the religious haters. One of the things I write about in the book is, how we respond to that. It's a choice argument. And there's a whole chapter in the book. When somebody says it's a choice, you look at them and say, choose it. Suck my dick. Like right now, if you believe there's a switch in your head that you can flip that turns you from not gay to gay, flip it. And I will use my camera phone and I will videotape you sucking my cock and we'll put it on XTube and you will win the argument. It's the only sort of irrational, rational response to that shit. And that's what I love to do with my writing sometimes, is just to take their premise and accept it and run with it. Like, okay, it's a choice. choose it. And that's one of the chapters in the book I'm proudest of. It's addressed to Herman Cain. Suck my dick, Herman Cain.
You and your husband Terry have one adopted son. I believe it's DJ. Yeah. You've said in the past that he has had to come out to you as straight. What was that experience like?
Our son, who is now 16, and nobody tweet about this. He doesn't like me to talk about him in public anymore because he's 16. Although he's fine with me talking about this, because if you have gay parents and you're straight, you want them to mention it at every opportunity. But he came out to us as straight, and it was weird because all of his life, earlier in his life, he had insisted that he was gay, that he would be gay when he grew up. He really wanted to be gay. At 9, we had this conflict with some neighbor, not really conflict, we moved into a new neighborhood, and DJ went out one day with his little friend, and they were rude to some girls in the neighborhood, and our block is like all girls, it's a matriarchy. It's all little girls, and he was like, they were shitty to these little girls, and it's Seattle. There's a knock on the door, and there's a Seattle mom letting us know, just so that, we're all clear, and you're like, we can and she ends this, we're like, oh God, we're so sorry, we'll talk to him, but she ended it with, I just think that, DJ has issues with women, and you need to look to that. And I was like, DJ's issue with girls is that he's a 9-year-old boy. He hates girls. Like, there's no issues with women. And the sort of passive-aggressive insinuation was, of course, in your all-male gay fag household, he's got girl issues. And so we sat DJ down and we're just like, you're 9, puberty's coming for you, we're pretty sure you're going to be straight. Just in case, you may want, now that the stakes are really low, to just have conversations with girls every once in a while. So that when you want to have conversations with girls in 4 years, it's not so terrifying and fraught. Like, do it now. And you have to be nice to the neighborhood girls, you can't be shitty. You don't have to play with them, you don't want to, but talk to them and don't be a dick. And his response was, I'm gay, I'm going to be gay when I grow up. I hate girls, that means I'm gay like you. And we went and got Terry's photo albums, because Terry's mom was a shutterbug, he has all these photo albums. We went and got Terry's photo albums, which are open to Terry, my husband's 9th birthday party. And it's him at a big table surrounded by 12 girls. We were like, you know what? Not liking girls at your age means you're going to be straight. Liking girls at your age, like Terry did, means you're going to be gay. But he sort of doubled down on this, like, I'm going to be gay. So it was a little awkward for him and decided, he had to finally tell us that he was straight. And I pivot in that chapter to an argument with Tony Perkins, who's the head of the Family Research Council, who's a shitty human being in every respect. He once threatened to sue me because I said Tony Perkins sits on a pile of dead gay children at work every day. And he sends people, maybe it's you, he sends people to tape me at events in case I say things like that, so that he can threaten to sue me. So if you're here from the Family Research Council and you dyed your hair as a disguise, that's great. Oh, good. But I'll say it again, right into your camera, just in case. Tony Perkins sits on a pile of dead gay children every day at his work. And the reason, I have to unpack that a little bit. The reason I say that is Tony Perkins encourages people to reject their gay children, to be hostile to them. And that hostility, research has shown, doubles a child's already quadrupled risk for suicide if they're queer. Tony Perkins tells parents to do what Tony Perkins knows doubles this already quadrupled risk for suicide, and then points to the suicide rate among gay youth as proof that the gay lifestyle is dangerous and unhealthy because look at all these kids committing suicide. Tony Perkins is a piece of shit, right? But Tony Perkins also argues that what makes kids gay is bad parenting, and what makes kids gay, and that gay people, by adopting, we're going to make our kids gay, we're going to raise them in this gay environment, and our kids are going to be gay. And I point out in this chapter, if my son didn't turn out gay, living with the gayest people on earth, like we are the Ringling Brothers' gayest show on earth at our house. We listen to musicals. There's photos of me on the wall in drag. Terry goes out to DJ in leather. Like, we're gay. And if it's not catching, if it is catching, this kid would have caught it. If it was contagious, this kid growing up in our house would be gay, and he is not. So Tony Perkins wrong about that too.
You wrote a memoir titled The Kid, I believe it was 1999. So 15 years later, reflect on that. Has anything changed? Or I'm sure that it has. What has changed?
A lot has changed since we adopted DJ. Terry and I were, sort of among the first gay male couples to adopt as gay male couples. It's funny, when DJ was an infant, people would meet us and assume that we had adopted together. And when DJ got to be about 10, people would meet us as a family and assume that one of us had had a child in a previous heterosexual relationship. Because gay men didn't have kids who were as old as DJ is. We were the first male couple that went through our adoption agency. We did an open adoption, which is where the birth mother chooses the family that the child is placed with. And they had never done a placement for a gay male couple before. And we went in to these meetings, and it's so clear that they didn't know what to do with gay people. The very first day of this seminar at the adoption agency, you had to sit around a big table, we did, with 6 other couples, and we had to all go around the table and share our infertility stories. And like, it's getting closer and closer to us, and I'm like, I keep inseminating him and nothing. So they're a bit more sensitive to that now, and now they do a lot of placements. The irony was they told us it might take 5 years. They told us we would be in for a 5-year wait. And we thought, okay, well, we've only been together 2 years. And, let's just fill out all the paperwork, get it in, and then 5 years from now, if we're still together, then clearly we're going to be together forever, and we'll have the kid. So we get all the paperwork in, and 9 weeks later we had a baby. And we're still together, so it worked out. But a lot has changed, and I really do think that the queer people parenting, whether they were queer people who had kids in past heterosexual relationships, which is the majority of queer parents. Per capita, the state with the most same-sex couples raising kids, not California, not Washington State, not New York, Mississippi. The biggest creator of gay households, of gay parent-headed families, is not MSNBC. It is religious conservatism. Most people who are queer who have kids had kids in heterosexual relationships that they entered into because they didn't think that they could ever come out. And then they get married early, they can't stay closeted anymore, they divorce, and they find a same-sex partner and become parents together. And anyway, I forgot what I was talking about. 5 years. But one of the things I think that the gay parenting movement, or the existence, not movement, just the existence of gay parents did, is it really gave the lie to the anti-marriage crowd. And they always want the argument to be about kids and how kids are doing in our households, and our kids are fine. Every study save the Mark Regeneris bullshit, now completely discredited and debunked study, shows our kids are just as happy, healthy, and well-adjusted on average as anybody who's straight's kids would be. And the existence of our kids as a fact on the ground made demagoguing about gay families almost impossible, and helped, I think, really drive the marriage movement in a positive way.
Last question before we get into your guys' questions. What is your opinion of the recent appraisal for Pope Francis for his discussion of LGBTQ people?
Do you guys know what's going on in Uganda? Uganda has passed vicious anti-gay legislation. The death penalty, I think, is not part of it right now, but throwing people in jail, there's really an anti-gay program going on in Uganda. Uganda is a majority Catholic country, and the original sponsor of this legislation is a Catholic woman. If the Pope meant what he said about de-emphasizing these issues, where is the excommunication threat? Where is the Pope leveraging his power to protect these vulnerable queer Ugandans, almost all of them Catholic queer Ugandans, from this violence, this state-sponsored violence? So I am not impressed. The rhetorical shift is valuable. I think it's important. If we can all agree to disagree about whether I'm going to hell or not and work on social justice issues and economic justice issues, fine. But there was a, put up or shut up moment in Uganda, and the church shut up. So I'm not that impressed. I am impressed. The Pope sent the top prelates, the top cardinals and bishops in the United States, to the U.S.-Mexican border, to the horrible fence, and had them say Mass on the fence, at the fence, and pass communion wafers through the fence to outreached hands. And symbolically, it was beautiful. It was a true sort of the Pope using it, or the Church using its moral authority and the spotlight that it can create to highlight a terrible injustice. So I was very pleased by that. I was thrilled by that. I wrote about it, praised it. But when it comes to LGBT issues, I don't think that they mean it. And I think that Uganda proves that they don't mean it.
Sorry about the music next door, guys.
It's a production of Godspell from the sounds of it.
All right, so now we're going to get into your guys' questions. So if you submitted a question, it may be asked. First, how do I tell my boyfriend that I want him to be more dominant when we have sex?
You elbow him right now, so he knows that was your question. Sometimes this is half the male. How do I tell my boyfriend or girlfriend that I want this? It's like, you fucking tell them. Often what that means is, how do I tell them without having to say it? How do I tell them without them realizing that I've been unhappy or I'm being critical? Like, go ahead, be critical. That person is either invested in your pleasure and wants you to be happy, or they're not supposed to be your boyfriend. And if there's something that you need, you should be able to ask for it. Sometimes we ask for things that people aren't capable of doing. Like, maybe he can't get there. Maybe it's a libido killer for him to be that kind of person in bed. Or maybe he has these desires that would mesh well with yours, but he is so sensitive and cowed by a culture that tells him that to be that kind of dick-swinging dominant in bed is offensive, potentially, or triggering potentially, that he sort of tamped it down. And rightly so, particularly at the beginning of the relationship. You don't bust out those kinds of dick-swingy dominant moves at the start. And he just needs permission to be who you want him to be, because it might also be who he wants to be. And then Yahtzee, you win the sex wars. But you gotta say, there's no avoiding saying, I'm gonna go ahead and assume you're straight. This is a problem for straight people more so than gay people. When you've looked your mother in the eye as a teenager, as a Catholic, and you've looked your mother in the eye and said, I suck dicks, which is what she heard when I said, I'm gay. The word wasn't all the way out of my mouth before she was picturing a dick flying into it, right? If you've had to look at your mother and say, I'm a cocksucker, turning to your boyfriend and saying, I want you to pee on me, or whatever it is that you want, is not scary in comparison. So straight people often have this hang-up about what they want to do in bed because they never had to stare down their mother and say that I'm gay. So for a lot of straight people, kink or dominance or play or variance, whatever, it's a mountain. It's a terrifying mountain that you have to climb in the relationship. And for queer people, that's like a fucking molehill. Tie me up, like now. What are you waiting for? Hello? I didn't tell my mother I was a cocksucker 10 years ago, so I couldn't do what I want to do.
Brendan Eich, Mozilla CEO, recently resigned. What is your reaction to those that are blaming the LGBT community, specifically to Andrew Sullivan, who has stated that LGBT people are being bullies?
The LGBT community had nothing to do with it. The Human Rights Campaign, and NGLTF, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, GLAAD, none of these organizations put out position papers. There were no queer people picketing and protesting and demanding his resignation. It was nothing like what we saw going down in Arizona when the Turn Away the Gay bill was percolating up. This was internal. This was a corporation freaking out about the guy at the head. And it wasn't just a gay thing. He had also donated money to Pat Buchanan's campaign in 1992 and supported some other, Rand Paul? No, the previous Paul, Ron Paul. Had supported him too, and that offended a lot of people. And it just became untenable for him to be the sort of the public face of this corporation. That said, I do agree with not Andrew's initial reaction and discussions of the gay mafia on Bill Maher's show, because the gay mafia had nothing to do with it. I do agree, though, that it's been a political setback for the LGBT civil rights movement. The optics have been terrible. Whether the gay mafia exists or not, it was perceived to exist. And it would have been perceived to exist had Andrew not written what he'd written. So I'm not into the monstering of Andrew that's been going on right now. Breitbart and Ben Shapiro and Fox News weren't waiting for a cue from Andrew Sullivan, who they loathe and despise. Andrew Sullivan has never been allowed on Fox News. They showed a cover story he wrote for Newsweek and blurred out his name. Fox News does not take marching orders from Andrew Sullivan. But that said, the optics have been terrible for the LGBT civil rights movement. We do not want to put it out there that you will lose your job. That's not helpful to people who are still on the fence, to the persuadables, to people who oppose us. I think Jim Burroway had some great things to say at Box Turtle Bulletin, similar to some of the things Andrew has written. Peter Staley, so it's not just Andrew, who's a friend of mine, so I take it personally when I see him monstered in the way that he's been monstered. I think his initial reaction was a little overstated, but that's Andrew. That's the way he writes, that's the way he rolls. Go back and read his reactions to the first Obama-Mitt Romney debate for a taste of how hot and fast his first reactions can be. But that said, I don't think in the final accounting it was good for us for Brett and Eich to be cashiered the way he was.
Recently, there have been criticisms regarding your language, and you have been accused of being ableist, transphobic, biphobic. I'm sorry for this ahead of time. You were even glitter bombed 3 times. Do you feel these accusations are accurate? And either way, what is your response to them?
Savage love when it started, a little less so now. Well, first on the trans issue, we all know now more about gender and trans issues than we knew 23 years ago when I started writing the column. We've all been on a journey on the trans front, and we all know more now. And trans people are now empowered to set the terms of the debate in a really good way, and rightfully so. But it does seem to me that there has been some opportunism and demagoguery around, we're having this moment on the left where we're having purity tests and show trials and hunts for apostates and heretics, and somebody who's on our side who put a foot wrong at some point or said the wrong thing or used the wrong term is a bigger threat and a bigger enemy than our real enemies and real threats. Cancel Colbert, for existence, I thought was stupid and obnoxious and misplaced. That tweet was out of context. There's a legitimate argument to be made about whether the joke, even in context, was problematic, right? But to say that Colbert should be canceled and say that you mean it and then say that you don't mean it, and for that to tear up all of Twitter, there were horrifying laws being pushed through at that exact moment in states, disenfranchising voters of color and poor voters and young voters. There's a big story on the front page of the New York Times about these laws in all of these states that are going to throw them into the Republican column. People are being disenfranchised because of the color of their skin, because of their economic status. And we're arguing about a joke on Comedy Central that gets 7 stories on Salon in 2 days? And not this shit? So anyway, now I'm digressing. Let's get back to what an asshole I am. When the column started, my sort of tact and what made it different was I let people use whatever language they were comfortable using talking about themselves. And the column, when it first started, "Hey faggot" was the salutation. Every reader addressed me as faggot. And I thought, as a Queer Nation baby, which is a defunct organization, which had this argument about reclaiming hate words. It's not a hate word if we use it. And I loved faggot. I call myself faggot all the time. I call my husband a faggot. We call our dog a faggot. I don't think it was true. The column proved that it was intent that made a word hateful. Because some readers wrote and called me faggot, and they loved me, and they loved my column, and they were genuinely seeking my advice. And some people called me faggot and then wrote these homophobic, obnoxious letters saying other shitty things about me. And it was just clear that it mattered whose mouth it was in. It mattered what the intent was, not the arrangement of these letters, not these two syllables, but intent. If I had used tranny, which you're not supposed to say, right? But I'm just going to give the example. I'm not going to say the T word. If I'd used tranny in the column and let people use tranny, which until 4 years ago was not considered a hate term, or was not known to be a hate term, and now there's been this sort of awareness raised about it and cry brought up about it, and people have stopped, including me, using it, but there's been now this sort of retroactive reclassification of all prior usages as hate speech, which seems a little obnoxious, frankly. But if I had let people use tranny in my column, and then every time someone used the word faggot, I had scolded them about hate speech and fallen down and had a heart attack, that would be hypocritical. But I didn't. Faggot, dyke, queer, sissy, tranny, breeder, which is our hate term for straight people, all got thrown around in the column constantly by people who were using them themselves to describe themselves, and by people who were outside that group using it, sometimes lovingly and sometimes not so lovingly, which proved that it was intent that made a word hateful. Am I biphobic? No. Am I transphobic? No. How do you disprove these charges? Because people will pull something out of context from a column and say, despite everything he's ever said on his podcast, despite every other column he's ever written that touches on these issues, that are right the fuck on, this one phrase proves that in his heart of hearts he hates. And that's just bullshit. It's just bullshit. And I don't know how else to respond to that. Am I biphobic? No. I won't pretend. One of the biggest chapters in the book is on bisexuality. And these charges that I am biphobic. Quickly, how much time do we have?
25 minutes.
Oh, well, whatever. Here we go. This is the thing that gets people charged with biphobia, right? Or me and some other folks. When somebody tells me that he's bi and he's 15, part of me goes, so was I. For many gay and lesbian adults, we identified first as bisexual as a part of our coming out process. That's just a fact. The galling irony for many bisexual people, and I wrote this in my book, the galling irony is that a lot of adult gays and lesbians insist that nobody is really bisexual because they weren't bisexual when they said they were. So because I lied about being bisexual, that means all bisexuals are lying. That has to be fucking infuriating. Because gay people lie about being bi when they're starting to come out. Gay people insist that all bisexual people are lying. Gay people create this problem for bisexuals by glomming onto this identity. But that doesn't change the fact that many of us do glom onto this identity. We just saw it with Tom Daley, right? Mika, the British pop star, did it. Came out as bi, then came out as gay. It's a thing that actually happens. The activist response is you should always believe anybody, however they identify, and you should never question or doubt. And my response is Ted Haggard says he's straight. Are you a bigot? Do you not believe him? And the ultimate irony, and I write about this in the book, is there was a very problematic, I hate that word, study out of Northwestern University where they couldn't identify bisexual arousal patterns in males. They got gay, bi, straight guys, gay, bi, straight women, and they wired up their junk, they showed them pornography, and the gay men's dicks responded to gay pornography, the straight guys' dicks responded to straight pornography, the bisexual guys' dicks responded to gay pornography. Right? And everyone was like, I guess this means there's no such thing as a bi guy. The women all responded to all the pornography. Women are crazy. You show straight women, gay, straight, bi, and monkey porn, and they get aroused. You show bi women, gay, straight, bi, monkey porn, they get aroused. Lesbians, gay, bi, straight, monkey, they get aroused. Men seem to be more fixed, right? And so they did this study, and it really cemented into place this attitude that bi guys didn't exist. Truly bisexual men didn't exist. They did the study again And they disproved the results of the first study. They documented bisexual arousal patterns in males. And this second study has been celebrated and heralded and promoted and talked about and pushed by bisexual activists. How did they arrive at that different result? Same researchers, same university, same methodology. How did they arrive at the results, the different results? The first time they did the study, anybody who said they were bi, they believed. The second time they did the study, they didn't believe people. The second time they did the study, it wasn't enough to say you were bi. 50% of the guys who came into the study the second time who said that they were bi, they excluded because they didn't believe them. So they proved the existence of bisexual arousal patterns in males by doing what I'm accused of being biphobic for doing, which is you just can't believe everybody. You shouldn't be shitty to people. When a 15-year-old kid comes out to me at bi, I don't go, no, you're not. But I do think, okay, sorry. Take him at his word, totally support him, don't want to be a dick. And this is just a thing that is. It's just a thing that is. And it's not biphobic to acknowledge a thing that is. And actually talking about this thing that is can help undo biphobia. When you walk gay people through how we create this PR nightmare for actual bisexuals, when we lie about being bi, then gay people understand our role in it, and that because our experience is different from the bisexual experience doesn't mean there isn't a bisexual experience. So it's not biphobic to talk about this, although I'm accused of being biphobic for talking about it.
Somewhat along those same lines, simple question. Any advice for a young guy in the process of coming out to his very, very, in all caps, straight male friends?
Very, very what?
Very straight male friends.
Very straight male friends. Just do it soon. Don't underestimate people. Look at Michael Sam came out. All his teammates are totally on his side. The one guy came out in this, I don't know, the university, a swim team. One guy came out, and then another guy came out, but the other guy didn't want to come out publicly, but they issued a statement that said there are 2 gay guys on the team. And all of the straight guys on the team were sort of signing up for potentially being perceived to be gay. Don't underestimate your straight friends. It's a new world. These days, to be homophobic is kind of gay. And that's working in your favor. You look at a Ted Haggard, you look at a George Rikers, you look at these high-profile, sort of strident anti-gay, closet case activists, these anti-gay activists who keep getting outed as gay. And I think people have made that association now, that, if you have a problem with gay people, and you say you're straight, well, maybe you're not. And there's actually a study that people who are homophobic, men who are homophobic, are aroused by gay porn. So what are they doing? They're externalizing their internal conflict and hitting you. So I would say don't underestimate your straight friends. Even if they said shitty, stupid, thoughtless, straight, joking, fag things, on the assumption that there's no gay people in the room, even then, don't underestimate them. Usually now, these days, individual results may vary. Don't do anything risky or dangerous. Be thoughtful and careful. But often what I hear, the feedback I get in my column, that somebody came out to their straight friends who they thought were homophobic because of the things that they said, and the first thing out of their straight friends' mouths are, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That they start remembering all the shitty things they said in front of you. And they were just broing it up, and it was this straight bro code, and they obviously didn't mean it, and they feel terrible about it. But if you come out to them and they're shitty to you, then cut them out of your life. They were never your friends. Go find your friends, your actual friends.
What should an older virgin tell their when should an older virgin tell their potential partner that they're a virgin?
When should you tell your potential partner that you're a virgin? You don't want to blurt it out before the salad comes. If you're going on one of those old school dates that people used to go on. But you do want to say, eventually, we just talked about this on the podcast for next week. You want to tell someone that you're a virgin because you're going to be really bad at this sex stuff at first. You are going to be inept. You don't want them to think that you've been having sex for a long time and you're still terrible at it. You want them to think, I'm going to take this diamond in the rough and polish it. And you don't want to be with somebody who doesn't want to be with you if you're a virgin. That's a terrible person for a virgin to have sex with for the first time. You want to be with somebody who feels honored, who feels, who's down with it, who's going to roll with it, who's going to see your ineptness is kind of charming, as opposed to, what the fuck is wrong with this person? And they'll feel good about themselves for being your first. So when do you roll it out? Before you fuck the first time. Well before you fuck the first time. You know, maybe it can be sexy. Maybe you've seen it in movies where people are making out and they're about to like do it, and one of them says, "I've never done this before." And the other person kind of like goes, "Ooh," and then they fuck, right? It's amazing. The sex is amazing, which it wouldn't be if one of them had never done it before. Don't wait till that moment. You know, have a couple of makeout sessions. Let them taste your spit. Let them know that you're good at kissing. Get good at kissing, and then lay it on the table. And if they run, they were the wrong person. Telling someone you're a virgin. Telling someone you're HIV positive. Telling somebody that you're trans. There's all these things that we're afraid. Tell someone you have herpes. All these things that we're afraid to tell people because we fear rejection. When you tell someone something like that, as I like to say, you are telling them one thing about you. Their reaction tells you everything you need to know about them. It is a sorting hat Harry Potter superpower. It sorts the assholes and the good people. It separates them. It lets you know whether the person that you're thinking about fucking the first time you ever fuck is someone you should ever fuck. And so regard it as something that empowers you, not as something that disempowers you or leaves you vulnerable.
Is marriage a dying institution, and should it be?
Is marriage a dying institution, and should it be? I'm married. So I don't think it's a dying institution, nor do I think it should be, necessarily. It's not for everyone. Although, you know, I talk to my lefty friends sometimes, and they seem very invested in this idea of marriage that's exactly the same as Mike Huckabee's idea of marriage. That marriage is this patriarchal institution where women are enslaved. It's like, well, yeah, except for mine. Only Terry's enslaved in my marriage. It is that if you want it to be that. Marriage is whatever two people say that it is. Marriage is only as patriarchal and oppressive as you choose to make it. That's why we're winning the marriage debate. Not because queer people wanted to redefine marriage, but because straight people already did. That marriage for centuries, millennia, was oppressive and patriarchal. It was a slave trade. A man who owned his daughter gave that property to another man, and it became wife, still property. She couldn't own property, she couldn't own her children, she could be beaten, she could be murdered, she could be raped. She had no rights. She was chattel. And straight people, to their credit, after, well, I guess to their discredit, after millennia of this bullshit, redefined marriage to be the legal union of two autonomous individuals, period. The end. Whatever else a marriage is, those two people get to say it. Southern Baptist couple, the wife can submit joyfully to the husband, they can have a traditional marriage, they're married. Couple of crazy, femdom cuckold couple where he sleeps in a cage at the foot of the bed, they can get married too. And they're no less married. We only hear that marriage is defined by religion, children, monogamy, there's one other. When gay people want to marry. When queer people want to marry, suddenly marriage is defined by these things that are totally optional for straight people. Straight people can be married and not monogamous. They can be married and not have children. They can be married and not do it in church. They can be married and not for life. The religious conservatives want gay people to get married in 1814, and straight people can get married in 2014. And it's bullshit. So is marriage a dying institution? Absolutely not. It is a constantly evolving institution. And it is important. I think it's particularly important for queer people to have access to the rights that marriage brings. And I don't mean health care. We need to decouple health care from marriage. That oppresses single people, and it's bullshit that health care is contingent on having a job or marrying the right person who has a good health care package. Bullshit. We need single payer, and everybody should be entitled to it, married, single, or anything else. What marriage does, and what is particularly important for queer people, many of whom still, even today, have hostile, homophobic families, is you can name your next of kin. You get to pick the person who is your nearest relative, so that when you are sick, when you die, when you end-of-life decisions have to meet, any sort of hugely important thing, the person you chose, not the person assigned to you by an orgasm your dad had and your mom, 35 years ago decides, no, I picked Terry, he picked me. He is my closest relative. My family, my biological family is now one step removed. And if your biological family is hostile, to not have that power leaves you vulnerable all your life to the machinations or the oppression or the viciousness of your biological family. And that's why marriage, and that for many reasons, is a social justice issue.
Do you think polygamy should be legal?
I think polygamy should be legal. And here I get in trouble. There is an argument to be made. I think there are separate arguments. Jonathan Roche, in his book Gay Marriage and Why It Matters, Why It's Important to Straight People, Gay People, makes a really good case against polygamy. That there's, if one man has many wives, then there are many men who have no wives. That there's a power thing. That it creates economic injustice and societal instability. That there is an argument that can be made against polygamy that can't be made against same-sex marriage. I'm not sure where I come down on that. I have friends who are poly. I have friends who are in relationships with people who, aren't citizens and can't stay in this country. And it is unfair that they don't have this ability to create kin out of this person. In the same way that Terry and I have the ability to create kin out of each other. And so I guess I'm on the fence, maybe to borrow Barack Obama's term, perhaps I'm evolving on this issue. But, polygamy historically was the most common form of marriage, and it is a characteristic of most super patriarchal, super shitty to women societies. So if we're going to tiptoe up to group marriage or some form of polygamy or polyandry, we need to be very cautious and very careful that we do so in a way that we don't, people who have a problem with marriage as a patriarchal institution, wait till you see polygamy as practiced in the cultures where it is legal. It's patriarchal on steroids and crack cocaine. So obviously I'm thinking through it, but I'm not here to say I'm for group marriage.
This is a juicy one. Do you think the world will be a better place without any religion at all?
Who am I to disagree with John Lennon? That said, humans need ritual, and we need, foxtrots and dance moves and spells that we can mumble at important moments to solemnize them, moments that are so powerful or traumatizing that we need some framework to lean on, or many of us do, a great many of us do. And so we need some form of ritual that's transcendent, that connects us to each other in a way. And I think as atheists and humanists, it's not helpful for us to shrug and insist that's all silly and meaningless. My mother died, and I was in a hospital in Tucson, and one of the last things I was able to do for my mother was go find a priest, because my mother was still Catholic, to perform last rites, and I stood there at my mother's bedside saying the prayers with her. And it gave us something to do. It gave us words when we were all, when our mouths were stopped by the horror of this moment. And it allowed my mother and I to speak to and with each other one last time in this deflected way. And having been through that, I can't piss on it. I can't say that that wasn't a wonderful thing to have in my pocket at that moment, those prayers and that ritual, so that my mother and I could touch each other and remember, and to say the things with my mother that were said when her father was dying, that she said with her father when he was dying, and that her father said with his father when he was dying, to feel that connection back through generations at that moment. Now, it is why I do kind of call myself culturally Catholic. I think of my Jewish friends who believe in nothing. Not all Jews believe in nothing, but my Jewish friends believe in all bacon-eating cocksuckers, who do Rosh Hashanah, who do Yom Kippur, who get together and affirm their cultural identity as Jews. And I think that's the trick. And I think we should look to a lot of the Jewish people in our lives, even in secular circles, are able to stick that dismount. They leave their religions, or they never really had one, but they're able to tap into their cultural sense and this cultural identity and these cultural traditions as Jews without feeling compromised or made stupid by them. And can we not do that can you not do that as a Catholic as well? You can, I did. So I'm not going to say there shouldn't be any religions, because I needed to pray with my mother at that moment, and so the Spanish Inquisition was all right with me. I'm not saying that. But there's something there, and we'll have to evolve it or change it or create some parallel solemnizing rituals and moments. Maybe we'll just borrow all this shit from Game of Thrones. Wedding ceremonies with the cloaks.
What responsibility do teachers, schools, and policymakers have to make classrooms safe and inclusive for LGBTQ students? And furthermore, how do we reform sex education?
Oh my God, that's like 40 minutes of answer. We need GSAs in the schools. Teachers have a particular responsibility to queer kids, because the worst bullies that many queer kids encounter in their lives are their parents. We always are talking about schools as the killing ground for queer students, the place where they're bullied and picked on. For a lot of queer students, school is the refuge, because home is as bad or much, much worse. And so we need schools to be safe and welcoming places for all students. And there's really important research out of the University of Illinois that shows that schools where anti-queer bullying is unchecked are terrible places, not just for the queer kids. The suicide rate among straight kids is higher in those schools too. And sexual assaults against girls are really high in those schools. If you want to make schools safer for girls, you need to attack anti-queer bullying. If you want to make schools safer for all the girls in the school, you need to make sure that those schools are safe places for the gay boys and the lesbians and the bi kids and the trans kids. Because if the worst thing that can be said about a boy in a school, the worst thing that can be thrown at him is faggot, the quickest way to disprove that charge is to sexually harass or assault a female student in front of witnesses. So allowing this shit to roar unchecked in schools isn't just a disservice to queer kids, it's a disservice to all kids, particularly female kids. How do you make it safer? Educators, administrators, you do the right thing and you push back hard against the bigot parents who don't want the right thing done. They don't get to live in a world anymore where queer people are not acknowledged as existing, which is what they want. I don't want my kid to know, like, fuck you. Those days are over. I hear sometimes, though, from teachers who are just, the kids say, that's okay, I correct them, I can't seem to make it stop, and they feel terrible they can't make it stop. No, the important thing is you keep correcting them. You're not going to make it stop. They're going to say that's so gay. My son says that about salmon. Just the other day, oh, salmon for dinner, salmon's so gay. This salmon got fucked in the ass in the ocean before we ate it. Not that straight people don't do that. What's important at that moment when the kids are saying that's so gay is for the gay kid who's not yet out, the queer kid, the lesbian kid, the bi kid, who's standing there, hearing that, for the adult to say, that's not okay, because it gives that gay kid hope for a future full of people like that adult. So it's the saying it, it's the pushing back, that is the victory. So don't despair. If you can't stop the that's so gay, it doesn't matter. That you are seen attempting to stop it is what matters. Oh, and sex ed? I think we talked about this last time I was here. We don't have sex ed. Even liberal progressive schools where we think we have sex ed, where we call it comprehensive sex education, bullshit. It's reproductive biology. That's it. Spermatozoa, zygotes, fallopian tubes. Nobody thinks about that when they're trying to get laid. What we need to have in sex ed is pleasure. We need to teach pleasure, consent, sexual negotiation, kink, queer. All of this needs to be covered and taught, and none of it is. Our sex ed is like a driver's ed course where they don't teach you about steering, they don't teach you about brakes, they don't teach you about turn signals, they don't teach you about that red octagon on the stick at the end of the street. They teach you about the internal combustion engine and how it works. The gas is sprayed into this chamber and the spark plug makes it explode and then the pistons go like this. Here are the keys to your car. If that was our sex ed, if that was, basically that's our sex ed. That is our sex ed. We have reproductive internal combustion engines and how they work, and then we hand kids the keys to their sexualities, and, if your driver's ed was like that, the first time you got in a car, you'd kill somebody. Well, that's our sex ed. And the first time kids get in cars, they kill somebody. We don't teach female pleasure because it doesn't make babies. Well, women can have sex without having any fun, and a baby will happen. So we don't have to cover female pleasure and the clitoris and what it's all about and where it goes and how it works, because it doesn't matter to the making of babies. And then people have sex, young men have sex with women who are not enjoying themselves, who are clearly not having any fun, who are not experiencing any pleasure, and it doesn't occur to them that there's a problem with that. It doesn't occur to many of the young women that there's a problem with that, because they didn't know that her pleasure mattered. We set kids up to be raped or be rapists by not covering female sexual pleasure in sex ed. That's gotta fucking stop, right? But we're never gonna do it. We're never gonna, in a way we can't get there. We need Scarlet Teen, we need Planned Parenthood, we need even jackasses like me, because we can't get there. Because what I talked about at the podium, it's pleasure they have a problem with. That's why the problem with birth control, abortion, same-sex marriage, they hate sex for pleasure. Could you imagine a sex ed course in an American high school where they talked about sex for pleasure? There's a study out of the UK, which is right over behind you, right there, don't know. That demonstrated that many, many, many kids were having sex that was not pleasurable, that did not feel good, that physically was painful, because they didn't know sex was supposed to feel good. They literally did not know that they were doing it wrong, that they literally thought this is what sex is, an unpleasant ordeal. It's bullshit. It's got to stop, but I despair of us ever making it stop. We particularly need to talk about consent, but you can't say we have to talk about consent, because the conversation you need to have about consent in a sex ed class is, how do you talk someone into fucking you? Right? Teen romances, teen comedies, teen life, there's a certain stage where they're all out there trying to talk somebody into fucking them. That's about obtaining consent. It should be about obtaining consent. But we can't tell them, like, this is how you talk someone into fucking you. This is what you say. This is how you ask. This is how you get yes. Don't wait for a no, get a yes. This is how you ask. This is how you say no if you haven't been asked. This is how you ask. But we would never teach that, because then they would do it. There's just a study that came out last week, which is over here. Found that 82% of kids are already sexually active before they've had any sex ed courses at all. 82%. CDC studies, so solid science. So this attitude that if we just don't teach kids about sex, they won't have it, this idea is bullshit. They're having sex with or without an education. We need to give them an education, so we'll have lower teen birth rates, lower unplanned pregnancies, fewer sexually transmitted infections, less sexual violence, less intimate partner violence, less terrible, awful, deeply regretted sex that leave both partners feeling like shit bombs. But I don't know if we can get it, because Canada got the French, Australia got the convicts, and we got the Puritans.
All right, we are practically out of time, so last question. I've saved this one for last because it's pretty relevant to all the college kids in the room. Dan, how can college students manage hookup culture if they eventually want to be in a relationship?
About 15 years ago, these studies came out that found that participating in hookup culture made it harder to form lasting relationships. And this was thrown around. It was kind of a sex panic that all the college students 15 years ago were setting themselves up for long-term romantic failure, for divorce, because, oh my God, they're participating in hookup culture. It was bullshit. The thing they didn't do in these studies, where they looked at people who had participated in hookup culture and whether or not they were in long-term relationships, was ask these people if they wanted to be in long-term relationships. When you took the people out of the sample who had no interest in a long-term relationship and consequently were not in any, people who participated in hookup culture were no less likely to form lasting relationships. So how do you participate in hookup culture without damaging yourself? It's not about the hookup culture, it's about how you hook up and who you're hooking up with. Like, you can't blame the culture like it's a tornado that sucks you up to hook up Oz. It's who you are and how you move through the culture and who you're with. And you just have to do it smartly. You have to take some responsibility for your sex, your sexuality, who you are as a sexual person, how you treat other people. But the thing I always like to say, I shouldn't say that, I should say the thing I like to say, particularly on a college campus, is you have to be nice to the people you fucked. Nothing can transform a hookup culture quite as beautifully as that simple thing. If you fucked somebody, you hooked up, you made out, you fucked, and you don't want to fuck that person again, and they're in your class, or you're walking by them on the quad, smile and nod, motherfucker. Acknowledge their existence. If you're afraid that if you smile at that person, they're going to misinterpret that as a desire to marry them or continue to hook up when you're not interested in another hookup, use your fucking words. You just say to them, saying this to someone is so much less awkward than being iced by somebody that you fucked, somebody whose genitals were in your face, somebody you rimmed, pretending you don't exist. That's awkward. Somebody that you had sex with saying, that was really fun, I don't think I'm interested in hooking up again, not assuming you're interested either, I'm not assuming I'm so awesome or anything, but let's be friends, you're great, I'll only ever speak highly of you, and that was, I think, just a one-off thing for me, and it'll be a little awkward the next time we run into each other, but I just wanted to not do that thing where I'm supposed to pretend you're not there lest you misinterpret. Hearing that at that moment is awkward. It's so much less awkward in the aggregate than being ignored over and over and over again in classes, on streets, in bars. Be nice to the people you have sex with. Be nice to the people who are nice enough to give you a fucking orgasm. How hard is that? But beyond that, like, how do you participate in hookup culture without being damaged? Don't be too drunk. Don't be too fucking fucked up. Don't abuse people yourself. Learn to identify people who are shitty. Self-scrutinize to make sure you're not one of the shitty people. Apologize when you fuck something up, and be kind. It's really not that hard. And I learned that the hard way. Like, I was gay and young and sexually active, and if I slept with somebody and I wasn't going to sleep with them again, I would like pretend they weren't there at the gym or whatever. And then one day I just went, this is so much work to not see this person. So I just went, how you doing? And he went, oh, good, you look good, see you around. Ah. And then what happens is that person, if anybody asks them about you, if you've been icing them, they're going to say, that person is a shit. That person is a malicious fucking ingrate shit. I rimmed that person for 45 fucking minutes, and now you're going to look at me. But if you're nice to that person, even if it doesn't go anywhere after, even if you have that momentary awkward conversation about, yeah, that was good, but I don't think, you're nice to that person, someone asks that person about you, they'll say, oh, he's a good guy, or she's great, we hooked up once and nothing came of it, but totally nice, and yeah, if you're interested, go for it. You want that kind of fucking endorsement. And you get it by being nice.
Literally a fucking endorsement. Give it up for Dan Savage, everyone.